Maynard Bray said, "I hear that Grayling is in North Haven, and wouldn't it be great to go in and see her?" So we did. And Maynard, of course, was enormously enthusiastic, being primarily a historian and a saver of old boats. And he said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if someone bought this boat and fixed her up as a yacht?" And I didn't say anything, but I thought to myself, you must be joking, because this boat wouldn't even burn properly. It is so rotten. Ted Oakey, who was a long-standing customer at this point and a friend, and really a patron and a great guiding light in my design work, had been looking for a sardine carrier for some time, and he knew via Maynard that Grayling was available. A year or a year and a half later, there I was, back at Thayer's boatyard on North Haven, putting a tow line onto Grayling, getting ready to tow her back to the Benjamin River for a restoration. Grayling was built in 1915 by Frank Rice in Boothbay, East Boothbay, I believe, for his brother, George Rice, who was the highline fisherman in Boothbay at the time. Grayling's early fishing exploits under George Rice included going out into the Gulf of Maine, towing one or two large seine boats. And a seine boat is a double-ended boat. It's kind of like a giant peapod. And they would pay out the nets into the water as Grayling sort of circled around the school of fish and back to the beginning. And then they would close up the net and offload the fish into the seine boats and into Grayling. So when George Rice decided to trade up for a new boat, he sold Grayling down east to Lubec, where she was put into service as a sardine carrier. And she spent the next 60 years carrying sardines along the down east coast into the Lubec canneries. And on one of Grayling's very first trips, she landed something like 75,000 pounds of mackerel. She arrived in Portland with her hold full and both seine boats full of fish. A commentary on how incredibly prolific the Gulf of Maine was at that period of time. It was an important priority of Maynard's that we should try to document Grayling's original shape, construction, layout, and Maynard is an expert at those sorts of things. You know, he's steeped in boats of that period. So he was really the guiding light as far as making sure that those original drawings were as accurate as he felt they possibly could be, and that there was a complete list of construction specifications for her that could go along with a set of plans for historic students of that sort of thing. We had nothing to go by pretty much on the pilot house because it had rotted away long ago and had been replaced by a plywood affair. We had the bolt patterns where the original pilot house had been bolted down to the deck, because that part of the deck was still original. So we knew the outline of the pilot house, and we had very few old pictures to go by. So largely with Maynard's help, we started to try to figure out what Grayling's pilot house would have looked like, how it would have been built, and how it would have been detailed. We tried to keep the general proportions and look as close to the original as we could. Like a lot of boats of her period, Grayling was built with really beautiful materials, and Frank Rice was a very fussy boat builder. She was built like a yacht, really. But In the ensuing years, she had aged a lot. There was a section of planking that was rotten in the top sides, right where the bulkheads met the planking. And the stem was pretty much shot, both stems, bow and stern. She's double-ended. A lot of the topside planking was rotten. A lot of the planking below the waterline was good. It was longleaf yellow pine, and there isn't any better wood for a boat of that size than longleaf yellow pine. All of her frames were pretty much, if not shot, they were full of iron fastenings. Like most workboats from the period, she was iron fastened. And one of the things that you bend over backwards to try to do when you're converting an iron fastened boat to a yacht is get rid of all the iron that you possibly can, because it will just bleed and the top sides will look terrible. In Grayling's case, since she still had her shape, the best way to replace them was to remove the frames, regardless of their condition, and most of their condition was pretty bad. Steam in new frames and put in bronze fastenings. So that's the approach that we used. As part of Ted's crusade to keep her original outboard profile the way she had always been, it included leaving any kind of rail off the aft deck, because she was intended to tow nets behind her from that. She has a very large aft towing bit, and the aft deck is completely clear. There's nothing in the way there. For most purposes, as a yacht, you'd like to know that when the kids are running around on the aft deck, they're not going to fall overboard and be left in the wake sometime. But Ted wouldn't change that at all. He liked the looks of it, and when Grayling sold to Mike Glassfeld, I had recommended that he think about raising the mizzen boom and putting a pipe rail around the aft deck just to make sure that Mike was of the same opinion as Ted. He wanted it just the way it was. Because she was designed as a seiner, which carries a much bigger crew than sardine carrier does, there were lots of bunks, and there was a cook stove, and there was a toilet up in the forecastle. And Ted decided that that was not a bad layout for his kids and guests. They could use pretty much the same layout. So we made very few changes to the layout in the forecastle, and the rest of the accommodations was really trying to fit Ted's wishes into the fish hold. Like almost all working boats of her type, Grayling's pilot house was built with what we would call drop windows. The sash could drop right down into a pocket in the wall cavity of the front of the pilot house and essentially open up the front of the pilot house. And it was an important feature for working boats because the skipper could drop a window and speak to the people who were working on the foredeck. But they're complicated to build, especially Grayling's windows, because the window sashes themselves are curved like the front of the pilot house. The old pockets in the pilot house were long gone, so we had to try to find a tin knocker who could build these copper liners that the windows fell down in. And they're not even radius. The front of Grayling's pilot house is an ellipse, not a circle. So the curvature of the various sashes is constantly changing as it goes around. I've spent a lot of time in Grayling, and she's pretty special, pretty easy on your mental state and everything.
My relationship with Grayling started right after she was rebuilt at Doug Hyland's place up in Maine. And I was a good prospect for maintaining the boat while she was going to winter here in Mystic at the Mystic Seaport Museum. And I took care of her for Ted, and then she was sold after about 11 years to Mike Glassfeld, and he wanted me to take care of her for him, and that was one of the questions I was asked when he was thinking about buying the boat was, I'm not going to buy her unless you can agree to take care of her for me as well. Grayling is, she's 65 feet long on deck, and she draws with the lead ballast that was applied to her at the rebuild. She draws just about 6 feet, and she's only 12.5 feet wide, so that's quite a ratio. And she's long and skinny and narrow and very round, great for speed and easily driven hull, but in the right conditions she'll roll the peanut butter out of the jar. However, speaking to that, she has a rig, and she carries a jib, and she has a mizzen, and as steadying sails, that fixes everything. When she was fishing and when she was working, I believe she had a full set of sails. I think she had a main that could go on the yard, and if they had engine trouble, they could get home slowly, but she could make way if the current and the wind were favorable. I remember getting a phone call from Ted Oakey, the fellow who had her rebuilt originally. He called me. He was up in Maine, and he said, "Listen." And I listened, and I said, "I don't hear anything." He said, "That's because we're sailing now, and we're making 2 knots. Along with being one of the easiest boats to be cared for at 65 feet, she also handles like a sports car. And it's fun. She's fun to drive. She really is, and she's very, very predictable. She's heavy enough. When Doug Hyland did the rebuild and the refit in Maine, she needed extra weight and ballast. She has interior ballast and exterior ballast on the keel to represent a bit of a load of cargo, so she can sit down on her lines where she belongs. She swings a 38-inch 4-bladed wheel on, I think it's almost a 3-inch shaft. Big stuff, big stuff. Somebody who knows how to operate a boat, you just need to get used to her for a couple of days, and then you can pretty much put her anywhere you want, and it's pretty sweet. She can get you around nicely at 10 knots, and she only burns 2.5 gallons an hour at 10 knots. So the engine in Grayling is a 671 General Motors diesel, and it's a naturally aspirated diesel. The truck engine is a popular motor. Anybody can work on it, and as long as it has air and oil and coolant, you can't kill them. The engine room is terrific. I call it the foyer because that's where you enter the boat. So there's a beautiful, beautiful sparkling diesel motor right in the middle of the foyer, and it's actually an engine room that you can work in. It's got headroom. You don't have to be a contortionist to change the oil. Cypress is the big event down below as far as varnish is concerned. Honduran mahogany for the doors, the heavy doors going through the bulkheads. The cherry for the drop leaf table, which is one of my favorite woods. And cherry trim around all the cypress V-groove staving. Color is a big part of what we do at the shop, and we like color, and we're not big on white. And we like soft colors, and we don't like high gloss. And my mother is an artist and an illustrator, and my grandfather was an artist as well. And my mom taught me how to throw dirt in the paint. That's what That's how she puts it, and it's like throwing dirt in the paint, and it just backs it off, and it makes it more natural and more earth tone, that type of thing. And the colors on Grayling were chosen up in Maine when the boat was rebuilt, but they are, I mean, those are the same colors that I probably would have chosen had I done the rebuild myself. The wheelhouse is a really special place, and quite a feat to build, and it had to be built just right. Sides of the wheelhouse are tilted in a lot more than you'd think, because if you don't do that and you build it square, it actually looks like it's leaning out. So they're probably tilted in a good 3 inches as you reach the roof. So there isn't a 90-degree angle anywhere on it. Now that we've been taking care of the same boat for 25 years, which is a sign that I've been in business for quite a while, I guess. It's been so long, I had to strip all the varnish that I put on the wheelhouse off a couple of years ago, and that was a big job. I was quite nervous about it. The wheelhouse is built out of cypress, and that's kind of a fussy wood that isn't friendly to scrapers and heat guns and that sort of thing, but it was varnish sick after 20 years. Now I think she'll be good for another 20 years.